We all face these tough choices, right? Moments where we're not sure what the right thing to do is. But what if I told you there's a kind of framework, a guide, to help us through those really tricky gray areas? So today, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful tools for making ethical decisions, the whole idea of moral duty. And this is the big one, isn't it? It's really the fundamental question of all ethics. Like, should we just focus on whatever gets the best results? Or maybe on just trying to be a good person? Or is there something deeper? For the next few minutes, we're going to explore a really powerful answer to this, one that puts the concept of duty front and center. And that answer comes from a field with a fancy name, deontology. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but the main idea is actually pretty simple. It says that morality isn't about crunching the numbers on what gives the best outcome. It's about sticking to the right rules, fulfilling your duties. Some actions are just right and others are just wrong, no matter what happens next. So let's see how this actually works. All right, so here's the game plan for today. We're going to start with this big question of duty itself. Then we'll dive into three brilliant philosophers who really built this idea out. We'll kick things off with Emmanuel Kant and the importance of our individual motives. Then we'll see how W.D. Ross helps us when our duties clash. And finally, we'll zoom all the way out with John Rawls to see how duty can shape an entire society. And then at the very end, we're going to wrap it all up into a neat little toolkit you can actually use. Okay, so our first stop on this journey is with the legend himself, Emmanuel Kant. Now, Kant believed that morality shouldn't be based on wishy-washy feelings or even on religious texts. He wanted to find a basis for morality that was rock solid, based purely on reason. And he started with a really fascinating question. So let me ask you, is courage always a good thing? Kant would say absolutely not. I mean, think about it. A terrorist could be incredibly brave, right? But they're using that courage for something awful. So courage itself isn't purely, unconditionally good. Okay, so what about something else? How about intelligence? Is being smart always good? Well, same problem, right? A brilliant criminal could use their high IQ to plan the perfect, devastating crime. So intelligence, just like courage, can be twisted for evil. It's not good without qualification. Kant was looking for the one thing that was. And this is where Kant drops his bombshell. He concludes that the only thing in the entire world that is good in and of itself, with absolutely no strings attached, is a good will. But of course, that just raises another question, doesn't it? What in the world makes a will good? Okay, and this is where you really got to pay attention, because the distinction Kant makes here is subtle, but it is so important. It all comes down to your motive, your reason for doing something. See, for Kant, you only get moral credit, so to speak, when you do the right thing for one reason and one reason only. Because it is the right thing to do, because it's our duty. All right, let's bring this down to earth with a classic thought experiment. Imagine a shopkeeper gives the correct change to a young, inexperienced kid. So why did he do it? Well, maybe he just really likes the child. That's just an inclination. Or maybe he wants to build a good reputation for his business. That's plain old self-interest. Or third option, he gives the correct change because he believes that honesty is a moral rule he must follow. So, according to Kant, which one of these has real moral worth? Only the third one. The other two, they're not bad, he'd say, but they're not moral. Okay, so Kant's idea is really powerful, right? Do your duty just because it's your duty. Simple. But what happens when those duties crash into each other in the messy real world? This is where our next thinker, W.D. Ross, comes in to give us a more flexible, practical approach. Just picture this. You've promised to meet a friend for coffee. That's a duty of fidelity. You gotta keep your promises. But on your way there, you see a terrible car accident. People are hurt. Now you have a duty of help. You literally cannot do both. So what do? Kant's system doesn't really give us a great way to solve this. And this is where W.D. Ross steps in with a super practical, brilliant solution. He said, our duties aren't absolute commands. He called them prima facie duties. It's just Latin for at first glance. The idea is that these are all real binding duties, but when they clash, we have to use our own moral intuition, our judgment, to figure out which duty takes priority in that specific moment. And Ross didn't just leave us hanging. He gave us a list of these core duties. So if we go back to our car accident dilemma, it's pretty clear, right? The duty of no ill will, which means not harming others, and by extension, helping when they are hurt, that one absolutely outweighs your duty of fidelity to keep that coffee date. Ross gives us the categories and then trusts us to use our judgment. All right, so we've looked inside ourselves with Kant, we've navigated real-world conflicts with Rawls, now we're going to zoom all the way out. What's our duty not just as individuals, but as a collective? How do we build a society that is fundamentally just for everyone? This was the massive question that philosopher John Rawls dedicated his life to answering. So, Rawls starts with this really fundamental problem. I mean, think about it. If you ask someone who's super wealthy what a fair tax rate is, and then you ask someone who's struggling to get by, you're going to get wildly different answers, right? We're all biased by our own place in the world. So how could we possibly agree on fair rules? Well, Rawls came up with an ingenious thought experiment to solve this.
He came up with this incredible idea he called the veil of ignorance. Imagine you get to be on a committee that designs the basic rules of a brand new society. But here's the twist. You have absolutely no clue who you're going to be when you're born into this world you're designing. You're behind a total veil of ignorance.
Like you don't know your race, your gender, whether you'll be rich or poor, what your natural talents are, if you'll be healthy or have a disability, nothing. From that position of perfect impartiality, what rules would you create? You're not going to rig the game for one group, are you? Because you might end up in the other group. You'd have to design the fairest possible system, just to protect yourself. And Rawls argued that from this original position, we'd all rationally agree on two basic principles. First, the liberty principle. Pretty straightforward. Everyone should have the most extensive basic liberties possible, as long as it doesn't step on anyone else's freedoms. And then there's the second one. And this one is a real game changer. It's called the difference principle. Now, get this. Rawls isn't saying everyone has to make the same amount of money or be perfectly equal. He's saying that any inequalities in society, like some people earning more than others, are only okay if that system works out to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged person. So yeah, it's okay for a doctor to earn way more than a cashier, but only if having that system of incentives and rewards ultimately results in better and more affordable healthcare for that cashier. It's a radical idea. All right. Phew. We have covered a ton of ground here, from the deep intentions of our hearts all the way to the basic structure of a just society. So, how can we boil all this down into something we can actually use in our own lives? So, let's put it all together. Here is your 3-step ethical toolkit straight from these brilliant minds. When you're facing a moral choice, first, pull out your inner Kant and ask, what's my real motive here? Am I doing this just because it's my duty? Second, bring in Ross. Do my duties conflict here? If so, which one is more urgent right now? And third, zoom out with Rawls. If I'm thinking about a rule or a system, would it seem fair if I had no idea where I'd end up in that system? You see, what these 3 philosophers show us, each in their own way, is that duty is really at the heart of a moral life. It's the engine that pushes us to do the right thing, for ourselves, for the people around us, and for everyone in our society. So, I'll leave you with this to chew on. If it was you, behind that veil of ignorance, designing a brand new world, and you could make just one fundamental rule to protect yourself no matter who you ended up being, what would that rule be?